All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Baruch Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim out here pushing his gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon their houses. This is Brother Kwana Watt from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp, coming back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. Hey, Christianity, man, pagan Christianity, right, is losing, right, bad, man. You know, really, call law Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, because this shit's been a poison unto our people, right, for decades, hundreds of years, really. You know, the last couple hundred years, you know, it's been a really bad poison, right, mentally, spiritually, unto our people, right? You so-called blacks, blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right, which we know are the Israelites, right, the true nation, right, true chosen nation of the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, and His only beloved begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, right? It's been a poison unto us, man, right? And now we're seeing it drastically decline. You know, recently I had seen, you know, I'm gonna say maybe a few weeks back, I had seen a video, or not a video, it was an article, Salakia, an article, right, of, you know, it was talking about the mega church, and you know, mega false prophet, right? You know, Joel Osteen, and how he was losing, you know, people in his congregation because, you know, they're ultimately questioning why he's not going into Matthew's, the 24th chapter, right, which ultimately touches on, you know, prophecy, man, the different signs that we are to look for, right, that Yahweh Shai told us about, right, that will give us, you know, the indication of the time that we're in, right? Earthquakes in diverse places, pestilence, uproars of the people, right? Wars and rumors of wars, right? All that is in Matthew's 24th chapter, in which we're seeing these things happen right now, right? You see, you got a lot more, as the scriptures say in Daniel's the 12th chapter, that, you know, that knowledge shall increase in the earth, you know, and knowledge is increasing, and more people are starting to, you know, ultimately see, you know, what's happening and starting to question it. Well, see, pagan Christianity can't answer those questions, man. Right? Only the true prophets of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, right, which start with our elder apostles of Great Millstone, right, on down, right? only the true prophets, right, can answer those questions, man, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, right? Because the Lord said, I will give you pastors according to mine heart, right, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding, man. See, these pagan Christianity, you know, pastors, really these false prophets, they're not sent by the Lord, man. Right? They're not sent by the Lord at all. You know, and this is why, again, the Lord is having, right, this pagan Christianity, right, come to naught, because it's of men, right? The Lord didn't send these men. You know, the Lord did not send these men, right, at all. You know, but I'm going to get into this article because, as you see right here, it says 15,000 churches could close this year amid religious shift in the U.S., right? 15,000 churches, right, could close this year. And as we get into this article, it's actually a lot more than that, you know? It says the U.S. could see an unprecedented 15,000 churches shut their doors this year, right? And we're at the last, you know, couple months, right? So within the next couple months, you know, 15,000 churches, right, could ultimately, you know, close their doors, right? It says far more than the few thousand expected to open, according to denominational reports and church consultants, right? It says why it matters. It says the unprecedented contraction, right, which ultimately means that there's a mass exodus, right, happening within the, within the churches, right, within the, you know, pagan Christianity, right? A mass exodus is happening, right? People are leaving the churches. People are questioning. You know, people got more questions. People are questioning their pastors. Their pastors ain't got answers, right? So they're ultimately leaving, right? And they're either becoming, you know, atheist, becoming spiritual, right? That's one thing that I've heard from a lot of people, man, right? I don't believe in Christianity, but I'm spiritual, right? Or they just say, I believe in the Bible, you know. They're not necessarily identifying with any kind of, religion, if you will, right? It says the unprecedented contraction expected to continue over the next decade risks leaving gaps in communities nationwide, particularly rural ones where churches often are crucial providers of food aid, child care, and disaster relief. It says the big picture. The decline of traditional brick and mortar churches comes as a record number of Americans, 29%, are identifying as religiously unaffiliated, right? That's almost a whole third of Americans, right? A whole third of Americans are saying, hey, I'm not Christian, I'm not Catholic, I'm not, this, that, and the third. They're just religiously unaffiliated. And that goes back to, again, these people saying, I just believe in the Bible, or I'm spiritual, or, anything along those lines, right? It says, and identifying as religiously unaffiliated, it says, and as 62% identify as Christians, down from 78% in 2007. So within the last 20 years, right, almost 20 years, right, about 16% of the pagan Christian population has dropped, right, left, right, which is a huge drop, man, right? That's not a slight drop, that's a huge drop, because they're talking about, I think, what is there, maybe 5-6 million, pagan Christian believers, right? And we're talking about, I think, from 2010 or something like that. I'd have to look the numbers up, but it's drastically declining, right? As we're seeing, it says, at the same time, mostly non-denominational megachurches and evangelical Christianity in general are increasing influence on American life, driven by charismatic leaders, sympathetic politicians, and social media, right? Where you got a lot of these different, motivational speakers popping up, this, that, and the third. They don't even go into the scriptures, man. They don't even quote. Like, if they quote a scripture, they'll half quote it, right? They might say a few words, but then they put their own words in there, man. Which aren't, they're not teachers, man. They're not pastors, They're just, again, they're motivational speakers, man. And this is what, people, ultimately want to hear, right? They don't want, most people they don't want to hear the truth, man. They don't want to hear, about war, evil, and pestilence, the fall of a kingdom, which is what the true prophets are going to be preaching about in these times, right? Pursuant to Jeremiah 28:8, right? Most people don't want to hear that, right? Let's grab that real quick in Isaiah. Isaiah the 30th chapter, right? It says right here, Isaiah 30:10, just hitting the point. It says, which say to the seers, which, the scriptures say that the seers aforetime were called prophets, right? So speaking about the prophets, right? It says, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. So they don't want to hear about the truth, man. Most of these people in the world, right, they don't want to hear about the truth. They want to hear about, motivational speaking, this, that, and the third, something that'll, make them feel better for the day, They don't want to hear a lie. They don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear a lie, And this is why you're seeing these non-denominational, motivational speakers, right, popping up, right? Again, they're not pastors. They're not prophets. They're just, people that went and got a 501c3 charter, and now they're pushing, right? Basically getting your money, right? That's what it's about, man. But when it comes to these, pagan Christian mega churches and whatnot, they're losing, right? TD Fakes, right? When that whole situation with him and Diddy and whatnot ultimately popped up, and he started losing his following, not a shit ton, right? Because he's got a lot of followers, and most of these people are wicked as hell, so they don't really care, right? But he did lose, some of his followers. And then you got, again, going back to Joel Osteen, oh, call law, how about Shemel Shah the chariot? But begin back to the point, Yeah, because he's not going into certain scriptures, right? People are starting to question him, right? And they're leaving his church, you know, which is ultimately affecting his pockets as well, man, you know. But it says, these colliding trends have shaken the nation's longtime religious footing. There are fewer and fewer communities built around local churches, but rising pressure from conservative citizens and government officials to inject more religion into public school settings and institutions, right? It says by the numbers, right? It says the record number of church closings forecast this year stems from struggles many churches face, including retaining full-time pastors, said Tom Rayner, a former president of Lifeway Christian Resources, an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention that provides resources for churches, right? It says, in a widely shared Baptist Courier piece, Rayner, a consultant on church health, said that waves of church closings are coming and that another 15,000 U.S. churches will move from full to part-time pastors. The National Council of Churches estimates that 100,000 U.S. churches across denominations will close during the next several years, confirming Rayner's analysis. 100,000 over the next several years, man. Right? As you read the next bulletin, it says that would amount to roughly a quarter of the nation's 350,000 to 400,000 churches a day, right? Which is a huge decline, man. Over the next several years, that's a huge fucking decline, man. Right? Which just shows you, right, that the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai is bringing this shit to naught, right? It says across denominations. So you got Seventh-day Adventists, you got Presbyterians, you got, Baptists, you got, all these different denominations. You got Catholics and all this other shit. All of them are coming to naught, man, right? Mormonism, right? Which all of those are created within the last a few hundred years, man. The last couple hundred years, last few hundred years, Christianity going back to the Roman Empire, Constantine, So it's like these things have not been around forever, right? They're especially like, Mormonism and whatnot. Those are recent, right? Within the last couple hundred years, man, they haven't been around long, man. And see, now we're seeing the decline of them. Because again, they're of men, right? The scriptures say that no lie is of the truth, and all of these different denominations of pagan Christianity, right? Catholicism, whatever you want to call it, right? Is lies, man. And Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai set up men, right? To those pastors, right? According to the Lord's heart, Jeremiah 3:15, right? That shall feed you with wisdom and knowledge, right? Set up those men, right? To do what in the spirit? Pull down those different strongholds, man, right? As we read in 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. I think it's 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, 10 and 4. 2 Corinthians 10 and 4, it says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through the Most High, Yahweh, B'Shem Yahushai, to the pulling down of strongholds, man, right? These are these different denominations and whatnot, these doctrines that are being pushed out there. These are different strongholds that have had our people, the Israelites, in for so long, right? They've been poisoning our people for so long. But see, the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai is cutting all that, right? It says casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of the Most High, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience. And bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of a Mashiach. That's right, man. Cutting all that shit, man. Hebrews 4 and 12. Sharper, this truth, right? Sharper than any two-edged sword. And when the prophets go out here and you got Christians that come up and Catholics that come up and people who consider themselves scholars, this and the third, right? The elder apostles, the elder bishops, right? The elders have said it many times. Someone who's been in the truth for 6 months will cut any so-called scholar, right? If you've been in the truth, following, elder apostles, the great millstone, following great millstone just in general, right? For 6 months, I've been studying for 6 months. You'll be able to cut any so-called scholar, man, because they don't have the truth, nor can they understand it, right? They do not have the truth, man. you know, and this is why they're coming to naught. This is why they're you know, the Lord Yahweh Bashem El Shai is bringing them down, right? Because everything is all of this shit is of men, you know. And I'll grab that, man, and we'll start to wrap this up. This is Acts 5 and verse 34. It says, then stood there up one in the council, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a doctor of the law, had a reputation among all the people, and commanded to put the apostles forth a little space, because they were out there preaching what? Yahweh Shai, the gospel, the truth, right? And they were being persecuted for it, right? It says, and said unto them, ye men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what ye intend to do as touching these men. For before these days rose up Theudius, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all as many as obeyed him were scattered and brought to naught, right? So he was ultimately, his whole following, his doctrine, all that shit was brought to naught, right? Erased, basically, right? It says, after this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed, right? And now I say unto you, refrain from these men and let them alone. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to naught. And we're seeing all these different doctrines and whatnot that are of men, coming to naught, right? And you know, it could be more, right? It could be more than 100,000, could be more than 15,000, right? For the remainder of this year, right? It could be 25,000. It could be 200,000 churches over the next several years, or if not all of them, right? Hopefully, you know, we're not here that long, right? Because soon, all of them are finna be destroyed. All the different idols, right? All the different false prophets and whatnot, right? All finna be destroyed, man, right? Hopefully, you know, soon, right? We see it. It's gonna be soon, you know? But if we're here for the next, you know, year or two, right? We don't think it's gonna be another 5 years, but if we're here for the next year or two, best believe, man, it very well could be a hell of a lot more than 100,000, right? It could be a lot more than, you know, 25,000 churches being, you know, closed, right, by the end of this year, right? We don't know, but either way, right, we're seeing the decline of these, you know, these false doctrines, right, and the you know, the removal of these false prophets, you know, which is beautiful, man, you know, because at the same time we're seeing their decline, and we're seeing this truth, right, constantly increasing. Because as it says right here in verse 39, it says, but if it be of the Most High, ye cannot overthrow it, right? Because it's going to continue to grow like a wildfire, man. And that's exactly what's happening, right? You start to see, you know, different great millstone camps popping up, right? Different, you know, affiliate camps popping up, right? Preaching this gospel, this truth, man. You know? And we're talking about in places that the apostles, the elder bishops, the elders, they're not going out here trying to set up camps, trying to recruit in different countries, man. Right? These people just ultimately, they find the prophets on YouTube or different, you know, social media sites, right? And the Lord ultimately, you know, works on them through the Spirit, and then they do what, man? They come into this truth, this knowledge, right? They learn, they study, they grow, and then they go out there and preach and teach, right? These men out here, man, you know. So this is of the Most High, man, you know, and it's constantly growing, constantly. But we're seeing these different false religions, right? These false prophets, these wayward ass doctrines coming to naught, man, right? Which is, again, it's a beautiful sight, man. We're in a very beautiful time through the Spirit, man. Jacob's trouble, right? We're here. Jacob's trouble is here. World War III is next, you know, and we're seeing the decline of our enemies. You know, it's a beautiful time to be alive in the Spirit, man, you know. But that's all I got, man. I just kind of wanted to hit that through the Spirit, right? Just kind of seen it and was like, hey, you know, it's a drastic decline, man. A drastic decline, right? It said record number of churches being closed, you know, which is beautiful, man. Showing you that the Lord is bringing this shit down, you know. But that's all I got, man. Lord will is edifying. Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Wadash, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders, the great millstone. Until next time, I say shalom.